for he showed a deep understanding of his people and the struggles that lay ahead for them. But the same question could be asked of any of the people, any of us in this day. Do we want these things? Will we still work for these blessings? In fact, could the answer to these questions be the very thing on which our future world depends? Thank you.
Wow, there is hope for our youth. Amen, huh? We have a very special feature next. Travis Long's family is going to come up, and I'd like you all to join in with them as they lead us in singing God Bless America.
No.
It's not easy. That's why we've done the work we've done. Get these maps. These are paper.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm Michelle Long, Travis Long's wife of Spectrum Sound. We're so glad to be here. This is my daughter, Victoria. She's 6. This is my daughter, Selah. She's 3. And would you join us, please? God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with the light from above. From the mountains to the prairies to the oceans white with foam. God bless America, my home, sweet home. God bless America, my home, sweet home. Let's sing that again. From the mountains to the prairies, to the oceans, wide with foam. God bless America, my home, sweet home. God bless America, my home, sweet home.
We appreciate that, folks. I guess I need, here we go. Now you can hear me. We have an opportunity to hear from someone about a really special and important item on land use. Ken Ivory here. Ken, come on up here. Ken is out of the legislature in Utah, and I had him on my radio show a few months back, and many of you may know what he's going to speak about, but the idea of the federal government continuing to hold on to so much of the land in the western states when the western states ought to be getting it back is something that had passed through my mind, but I had never thought about it so clearly until after I talked to Ken. And one of the and I wish I could remember the actual figures on this, but I think you were talking about North Dakota, and they went from 40% of their land being, stop me on this, a little more than 40% of their land being to the federal government, and over time down to 3 or 4%. And we have not had any change in that, and we need to get local control back on that. And Ken's going to talk about that, and he was just telling me some fascinating stuff about some other states. So without further ado, I give you Ken Ivory.
Man, he's stealing my thunder right out of the gates. What an honor to be with you. What an honor to be with you. Thanks for having me. It's an exciting time to be alive. If you're not ready now, buckle your chin strap. This is as big as it gets. Let me tell you, when I joined the legislature, I wanted to know how bad it was. Nobody knew. I knew we were getting federal money, and I wanted to know how bad it was. I don't know if you know how bad it is in Colorado, but in Utah, 45% of every dollar we spend in Utah, often considered the best managed state in the nation, 45% of every dollar we spend comes from a federal government that
Is us.
broke. It's broke. What kind of a business plan is that to pass on to your children? In Colorado, the number's 46%.
Oh, I do.
You're beating us. You're beating us. 46% of every dollar you spend in Colorado comes from a federal government that's overspending $1 trillion a year, borrowing $85 billion a month,
Giving y'all
and $17 trillion in debt. But there is a solution big enough.
Buy an album.
There is a solution big enough if we're willing to stand up. Let me tell you. See if this sounds familiar, all right? You know, there's this little map. Have you seen this little map before, the red? The little map. And back on this table, I got some of these cards. So back on the table with the tent back over here, I got some of these cards out here. More than 50% of all land in the states from Colorado to the west, except for Hawaii. This isn't a western state thing, folks. Hawaii got all their land when they were made a state. What's up with that? It's not a western state thing, it's just an arbitrary thing. But more than 50% of all the lands in these states from Colorado to the west controlled by the federal government. Just to the east of you, less than 5%. In fact, most of them less than 3% federally controlled land in their states. Now let me tell you a little story, see if this sounds familiar. The western states got fed up with this. They say, you're not disposing of our land like you promised when we were made a state. That promise is right in our statehood contract called an enabling act. You're not disposing of the land like you promised. We can't educate our kids properly because we don't have the revenues from off the lands. We can't grow our economies and provide good paying jobs. People are leaving the state. And you're hoarding all of our abundant minerals and natural resources and forest resources. Does that sound familiar at all? Thank you very much. Does that sound familiar? Yes. That was Illinois. That great state of Missouri. That great western state of Louisiana. And that really great western state of Florida. Now think about your geography there.
Come here.
Florida said they're the worst off of all the western states because the federal government's not disposing of their land. I want you to get that little map and look at it. You look at Illinois and Indiana and Missouri and Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi, Florida today. 3% federally controlled land. Access to their resources, access to their minerals, the ability to tax their lands and educate their children, provide jobs. What's our problem? It's already been done before, guys. This has already been done before. How'd they do it? Wasn't that a good question?
Yeah.
How'd they do it?
Okay.
They refused to be silent. They refused to be silent individually. They refused to be silent with their representatives at their most local level, their cities and their counties and their organizations and their states. And they refused to be silent, and they leveraged their voice. And so one voice became 10, like a group like this. One voice became 100. One voice became 1,000 or several thousand in their cities that were doing resolution after resolution. One voice became hundreds of thousands in their counties that were sending resolutions and petitions and delegations. And every time they had any contact with anyone in Washington, you know what they would say? When are you going to keep your promise so we can educate our children? When are you going to keep your promise so that we can care for our land? That those who are on the land, whose lives and livelihoods depend upon the land, who are more responsive and responsible to a forest fire, who are more responsive and responsible when beetles get in the forest and they say, gee, what are we going to do? Let's go cut the trees down and get rid of that beetle problem. Let's reduce the density in the forest so the forest is healthier, so we're not killing millions of animals, so we're not burning up and polluting the air, so that we're not destroying the watershed for decades, because those who are on the land are more responsive and responsible. Every contact they and their representatives had with Washington, when are you going to keep our promise? When are you going to keep your promise? Now let me tell you something else. North Dakota, your neighbor to the east, they were made a state after Colorado.
Yes.
Right? Colorado 1876?
Yep.
North Dakota, 1889. Guess what? The promises in your Statehood Enabling Act, the promise in your contract of statehood with respect to disposing of the land, they're the same. They're the same. Word for word the same. Word for word the same with respect to disposing of the land. North Dakota, 3% federally controlled land. Colorado, where it's somewhere north of 50%.
Yes.
North Dakota just added $3,700 per pupil above the national average to educate their children. North Dakota just added billions into schools and roads. North Dakota's given hundreds of millions of dollars back to their citizens. They got so many jobs, they're just looking for people to come take them. But guess what? Just last year, the Government Accountability Office, the chief auditor for the United States government, said there's more recoverable oil in Utah, Colorado, Wyoming than the rest of the world combined. There is a solution big enough. Promises are the same. It's already been done before. There is a solution big enough. Now let me tell you about what needs to happen here. Do you know that because we've got federal policies that said you can't touch trees in your forest. Can't touch a tree. Even if the beetles come in, start ravaging the forest because we got 1,000 trees per acre, they're more dense and now the trees aren't as healthy, sucking up millions of gallons of water because we've got this density in the forest. Can't even go in and kill the trees when they're dead and diseased, can't even touch them. Well, guess what's happening now? Department of Homeland Security and the FBI, they're now sending criminal activity alerts out to your state foresters, my state forester. Guess what they're saying? Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula now encourages the use of wildfire as a form of jihad. Our forests that were for wealth, to educate our children, our forests that were the means of wealth to provide jobs and grow our economy and provide the tax base, is now a weapon. Right now. That's happening right now. Now, what else happened? After 200 years where the federal government was a trustee, y'all know what a trustee is, right? Trustee holds title of the land. They do. They hold title of the land, but they hold title to give it to the beneficiary. Same thing from 1780 forward, all the way through our Constitution, all the way through our statehood, federal government was a trustee. Supreme Court for years and years and years called the federal government a trustee over those lands. In our contract of statehood, they were still the trustee over those lands. In 1976, Congress said, well, it's now our policy. Never mind the Constitution. Never mind the trust that happened when our nation was formed. Never mind the Supreme Court for decades and decades and decades saying they're just a trustee. They hold title to dispose of the land. 1976, Congress said it's now our policy to just hold these lands in federal ownership. But guess what they did? They took away the land, took away your right to tax the land, took away your right to harvest the trees, but they said, we're going to give you a promise instead. We're going to give you a payment in lieu of taxes. They call it PILT. It's about 15 cents on the dollar of what you'd get just average taxable value of the land. Does that sound like a good deal? No. You can take care of yourself. We could take care of ourselves, utilize the land. They said, we're going to give you a promise 15 cents on the dollar. But guess what? Not to worry. That promise isn't any good either. Because what's happening right now under sequestration where the federal government says, we got to cut our expenses. You think we're overspending by $1 trillion a year? Maybe we got to cut our expenses by $85 billion. Never mind, they overspend by $87 billion on the day before sequestration went into effect. We got to cut our expenses by $85 billion, so what are we going to do? We're going to go out to Colorado, and the mineral money, the royalties from the minerals that come right out of your land, that goes right into your classrooms and goes right into your roads and public safety, we're not going to cut our expenses, we're going to take your mineral money. Now, if you're North Dakota, and if you're Oklahoma, just to the east, you get 100% of your mineral money. You get 100% of the access to those lands, but if you're Colorado, you only get 48%, we're even going to take that. Right out of your classrooms, right out of your schools, right out of your communities. Now, when they said you can't touch the forest, they said, hey, we got a promise for you too. We're going to give you a promise. You can't touch your forest and harvest and create jobs and create a healthier forest. But what we're going to do, we're going to give you a promise called SRS, Secure Rural Schools. But guess what? They're not going to keep that promise either. Now, not only are they not going to keep that promise and cut back on that, this is all in the last 2 weeks, guys. They said, we're going to reach back, and the money that was already paid to you, the money that was already paid into your communities, guess what? We want that back. But you got options. Federal government's all about options. You can either reduce the federal money coming to you in the future, or we'll send you a bill and start collection. You like those options? I didn't think so. Now, the other thing we've got, too, is on these bill payments, you're supposed to be able to tax and use the land. We can't have that, so we're going to give you a payment in lieu of taxes. That one's no good either. We're now cutting that back. It was only 15 cents on the dollar of what you could generate. Now they're cutting that back 5%, taking money right out of schools, right out of roads, right out of your communities. So the federal government comes up with this policy in 1976, said we're going to retain the lands in federal ownership. Well, guess what? It's time to change that policy because communities are dying. You think it's time to change that policy? You think it's time for the federal government to honor to Colorado the same promise it already honored to North Dakota? Time for the federal government to honor to Colorado the same promise that they kept with Illinois and Missouri and Arkansas and Louisiana and that great western state of Florida? It's already been done, guys. What's our problem? I'll tell you, it's all about leverage. It's all about leverage. Your one voice becoming 10. Your one voice becoming 100. That's what they did. That's how they succeeded. They refused to be silent. You got to keep your promise. We can't educate our kids because 46% of every dollar we have coming into our state comes from a federal government that is What kind of business plan is that? Is that a business plan you want to pass on to your children? This young man that just spoke here a few minutes ago talked about freedom. What are we passing on to our children? My friends, we have an opportunity. We have the opportunity of a generation to stand up and provide the same kind of American opportunity we received by taking back Colorado. We have the opportunity of our generation by working together, just like those states, Illinois, Missouri, Arkansas, Louisiana, banded together, refused to take no for an answer, and provided opportunity going forward for their children. Let me tell you about leverage. You've got great county commissioners here. We met with Rose Puglisi and John Justman this morning. Your representatives, Ray Scott and Jared White. Where are they? Jared Wright, where are they? These guys get this, folks. They get this. And you want to leverage your voice through them? Imagine you get your counties all over the West now are doing resolutions saying you got to keep your promise with Colorado, you got to keep your promise with Utah, got to keep your promise with Idaho, got to keep your promise with Nevada. All over, these counties are passing resolutions, cities are passing resolutions, school districts are passing resolutions, chambers of commerce and cattlemen's and farm bureau groups, where your one voice becomes 100, your one voice becomes 1,000. And we start pulling those together to your congressional representatives, because is it time to change that policy that's killing communities? Is it time to change that policy that's killing our communities? Is it time to change that policy that is destroying our forest? Is it time to change that policy that is killing millions of animals right here in our lands? Is it time to change that policy that is decimating our watershed for decades? Is it time to stand up on the only solution that is big enough to restore our viable communities? Here's what I want you to do, okay? We got a petition back here at this booth right back here. I need you to sign the petition. It's already been done before. Promises are the same. It's time for us to exercise the only solution big enough. Sign that petition, get your information down there. We're going to send information out to you. Now it's time to leverage yourself and stand with your county commissioners and stand with your state representatives as they do the heavy lift. Particularly in Colorado, it's going to be a heavy lift. I'm not pretending that it's not. Utah, we already passed the bill to transfer public lands. We set a deadline at December 31st, 2014 to work with our federal governing partner to transfer those lands. Now, we took national parks off the table. We're not talking about that. We took national monuments off the table. We're not talking about that, except for Escalante. There was $2 trillion worth of coal. That one's still in play. We took congressionally designated wilderness off the table. We're not talking about that. But in Utah, Colorado, Wyoming, there's more recoverable oil than the rest of the world combined. Why are we sitting with 46% of our revenue coming from a federal government that is? Does that make any sense? No, it's time for economic self-reliance going forward. It's time for education equality for our children. It's time for greater care of our lands by those that are on the lands. So here's what you do. You sign a petition. Now you get your county commissioners, your cities, your farm bureaus, every group that you know to start moving that resolution. We're going to send that out to you. Get your email on that. We'll send that out to you. Now what you do is we've got, after we passed our bill, we had county commissioners coming from all over the West saying, y'all went on offense. We've been playing defense for 40 years. How's that working out? Is that working out well? No. Is that working out well? No. Is it time to go on offense? Yeah. That's what we're doing. We're going on offense to get the federal government to keep the same promise to us. They already kept with North Dakota. They already kept with Kansas and Oklahoma. Should they keep the same promise to Colorado? Yeah. So